What if your most embarrassing true story could turn into comedy by an improv team that's never heard it before? That's the premise of I Told You So. And it's hosted by today's guest, Dan Sturdivant. Dan teaches Introduction to Storytelling at the Dallas Comedy Club, and he coaches their storytelling club too. He also teaches digital marketing and SEO at Southern Methodist University. Today, we're unpacking the surprising way improv rewires storytelling, structure, timing, and audience connection. Dan Sturdivant, welcome to the show. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
So, my name is Dan Sturdivant, and I'm an instructor at the Dallas Comedy Club where I teach introduction to storytelling. I'm also the coach for the storytelling club that we have. So, once you've gone through the storytelling program, you can audition to be in the club, and then that provides further opportunities for people to perform. I have two shows each month. One is strictly storytelling, and that is through the club, the storytelling club. And then also have a show that's kind of interesting. It's called I Told You So. And what we have there is we have three storytellers who perform true personal stories in front of a live audience with an improv troupe that has, like the audience, has never heard the stories. So once the three storytellers have told their story, the improv troupe gets up and riffs off the stories. And it is quite funny how they can take elements from different stories and put them together and create a whole new scene.
I love improv, and improv is such an important part of the storytelling landscape. And I know you
Yes.
also teach at SMU. What do you teach again?
I teach digital marketing with a emphasis on search engine optimization, which that whole is going to change because of AI, but that's another
I heard
story.
you. Yeah, stay tuned for that because that will be another conversation. Today, we're focusing on storytelling and this idea of integrating improv into storytelling. Do you find people struggle with that?
Well, so what is interesting is our audience skews a little older, and a lot of times this will be the first time our audiences come to a comedy show, and so what we have to tell the improv, they're typically taking things like what's called A to C thinking, where you have a topic A and then you extrapolate beyond B into C and then D and E. But because our audience maybe hasn't ever seen improv before, we emphasize that they take elements from the story and incorporate those first and then build off of those. So yeah, it is. And the stories, again, they're true life stories. So there's elements that they can pull and, want in different scenes and put them together for, it turns out to be really fun.
Excellent. And I know you teach storytelling too. Can you take us through your process as you teach people who are new to storytelling, who want to use it in their business or in their professional lives? How do you approach that course?
I feel that everybody has a story that they somewhere in them that they want to tell. The way that I approach it is that when students sign up, they sometimes it may be that they got a gift for a Christmas gift in there, so they've been forced by a family member. It could be that they have something that they want to talk about. I have several people that their goal is to be on the Moth, and they have some stories that are really or TED do a TEDx presentation, so there's different reasons. Also, business. So telling, one of the things that if you can describe what your business is, how it works, and why it works, you come ahead, way ahead against your competition. So from a business perspective, it's a good thing to be able to tell a story about your business. But because we're the Dallas Comedy Club, the stories tend to end up having humor in them. And I'm a big proponent for there's humor everywhere, and it happens. You have to be not necessarily looking for it, but be aware of it in your life. There are things that happen all the time. When I was in high school, I was on a swimming team, and before I was able to buy my goggles, I would come into second period. We had swimming first thing in the morning. I'd come into class, and I was a freshman. All the seniors would look at me. One day, one of them goes, "Dude, where do you go?" I'm going, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Where do you go to get high?" I go, "What? I'm not getting high." My eyes were red from the chlorine. They were chlorinated, and they thought I was going out and getting high. And so, it's little things like that. You build a story around that. Kind of do a caveat here. That technically was an anecdote. And an anecdote is you start here and you end up here, and nothing really changes in your life. A true story has I was once this and now I'm that. And so in the class, what we talk about is different frameworks that allow you to put together a story that helps you understand how you might build this so somebody can understand. We usually use two frameworks. One is Freytag's pyramid, and then the other is ABT, and but therefore. And with that, that fills most and gets people off to a way that they can structure their story and have that. So with Freytag's pyramid, you start off with what is a normal world. And if you think about it from, let's say, Star Wars is a good example. The normal world was Luke was at home, he was bored, he didn't know what to do. Then there's some inciting incident. And in this case, it was Leah and her message. And he sees this, they then takes him into a new place where and then there's a mentor that comes along, which Obi-Wan Kenobi. Then there's some trials and tribulations. There's a highlight, an incident that takes them to the top, and then there's resolution. And so every story can be built around that framework. And so we work with that. And, 19 out of 20 times, we're able to have people build stories upon that framework.
That's awesome. And the second framework that you had after Freytag, that was if, but,
And
there,
but therefore.
and
So
but, therefore. Tell us about that.
and but therefore is really good from a business perspective in that you have several things that everybody can agree with. I drive a truck and I drive a long time and I make money doing that. But I have to be careful because I don't want to fall asleep at the wheel. Therefore, I study training and take training to make sure that I'm a good driver. So, that and but therefore the probably the biggest way that you can see it in real life is with South Park. That their fundamental way that they build their shows is on the and but therefore framework. And if you watch that and you start seeing that, you can see that being implemented across the show.
And you've chosen those two to focus on, but there are other frameworks that we use in coaching. I love the South Park example because I remember seeing when I first saw that video, a little light bulb went off in my head like, oh, this is how they're doing it. They pulled back the curtain. Could you pull back the curtain on some other frameworks that you find very useful for beginners?
There are others, and some riffing off of here's an incident. But a lot of times those are just anecdotes, but we concentrate on those two because once you get those down, the others come into play. So some of them get there's the 3 act format and things like that. And but when we with Freytag, we also look into things like Chekhov's gun, which is you don't bring something into a story that's not going to be used, which in a play, if you see a gun on the wall, then that means that gun's going to be used in the third act. So it's things like that that we talk about. We also talk about how do you do timing with a joke. A lot of times it's funny. Haha. Ironically, people will write things, and if they just put the middle at the end or at the end at the beginning, it becomes the humor just jumps out, and just a way people can turn a phrase adds a lot of humor.
Awesome. Can you give us an example of that? Because I know people that I have talked to who struggle with humor and they're like, how can I be better at this timing thing? How can I be better at making people laugh? This advice I know will help them.
So a good way is everything we do. We start with writing everything out. It's not like we have to. Well, we do memorize it, and let me clarify: when the students do the showcase, they're doing a live in person story without notes, and so there is some memorization that they have to do. I always think you don't need to memorize it if you lived it. Therefore, you're reenacting it to some degree. But to get to your back to your question, the big thing is writing everything out and then looking at where you can pull out elements and then put them at the beginning. A student sent me something. She had too many elements in it. And I said, take out these two elements, let this part breathe. And because of that, they gave it more emphasis on the back. And it was interesting when you pulled that back and you did that, all of a sudden that the humor comes out. So a lot of times we try to overthink things. We try to put too much in. One thing we also talk about is honoring the audience. That they don't need to know every single little detail about every little thing. Now, if you're talking about something complicated, or there has to be a nuance that then is coming out later in the story, then you need to have some detail. But for the most part, honor the audience, knowing that they come with a set of, with lifetime history of how things work. And also, if you have to go too deep into it, then what you're doing is you're doing a documentary and not a story.
Ooh, tell me more about that. So the difference between documentary storytelling and storytelling is the level of detail?
Let's go down the path of what is storytelling. Well, what I believe and what we believe at the Dallas Comedy Club is that storytelling is, like I said earlier, I was once this, now I'm that. but it could be and it should be a very small slice of life. And it doesn't mean that, okay, this event happened to me and this is what I'm going to talk about. You do have to have the exposition. How did I get there? What are these things that came into play? What made me this person in the first place? But it doesn't have to be a documentary about that. I wish I could do voices. I can't. What is his name that does the English voice? That the elephants are looking in there and the hippopotamus comes out. Anyway, it doesn't have to have all those details. It could be like I mentioned before. I went to high school in Texas. Being on the swimming team in Texas means you're invisible because if you don't play football, you're not anything. So that tells a lot in that little bit right there. And so having that is a thing to work with and then how you apply that. So building off that and then using a slice of your life there, I firmly believe that everyone has hundreds of stories and it's just keeping one being able to memorize them or not or writing them down. Matthew Dix, which I highly recommend, has a really good book called Storyworthy, and one of the things that he does is called Homework for Life. And what that is every day write down something that happened that day, and it may not be that that is a story, but there may be something that happened last month, this month, next month. You string those together, and all of a sudden that becomes something that you can talk about. I have a little app that I built for myself that I write things down, and I was going through it this morning. I need to be better at putting providing some details because I wrote "Big Bad Boss," and I'm thinking, "Wow, what was that about?" And then I remembered after a while the guy that was I worked for was a really jerk. He got fired, by the way, because he made the owner's niece cry. Even though I was sitting there, and saying this guy is bad, he's ugly, he's bad, he's no good at his job. But boy, the second he made the niece cry, he was out of there.
I love this idea of mining stories in our life, and I love Storyworthy, and I love that whole approach. But I know you have other approaches for mining stories and finding the right kind of stories to tell on the stage. Can you share some of those with us?
You will. So a couple of things. One, you're not trying to sell somebody on something unless you're presenting at a conference or something like that. One, you're trying to share something that you feel that other people might want to know, or that you are sharing something that may storytelling is the original technology. This is something that, when somebody shared something with somebody else millions of years ago, that became how we grew as a species. And so that part is something we, as humans, we love sharing, and storytelling is part of that. But deciding on what to use or how to use, sometimes students come with four or five ideas. There's a couple of things that I talk to them about. Is one, how long ago did it happen? Is it a scar or is it a bruise? And so with that, if it happened, I had a lady that pitched a story that she talked all about her best friend and how wonderful her best friend was. Well, her best friend died 6 months earlier, and you could hear in her voice there was still a lot of emotion tied to that. And so that wasn't the right time for that story. There needs to be some perspective, and she wouldn't have had that. There's also stories that you come into play. I have one I talk about my dad that going through the process of writing the story, it revealed some things that I had forgotten about and put in. I called up my brother and sister and said, "Hey, do you remember this and how, why, our father never changed. He was the same person when we were born and the same person when he passed away. He did a lot of wonderful things, that kind of thing. But it's just interesting how his arc wasn't that, it was kind of flat. It was way up here, but it was flat. But and then I get in trouble for this. Sometimes what I do with the "I told you so" story show is I tell a little bit of a story at the beginning because I want people to understand what a story is versus stand up. Some people think they're going to see a stand up show. And so what I do is I said, no, story is different. For instance, I'm at a age where I have to have where they put something up your butt and they, do that. Well, now there's new technology called Cologuard. And Cologuard's really cool because you get a box and then you do something in the box and then you wrap that box up and you take it. So I did that. I followed all directions and you have to take it pretty quickly to get it, shipped off. So I go into the UPS store where I frequent a lot and the guys know me there and I walk in with the box. They go, "Oh, well, we know what you just did." I said, "Yeah, yeah." Hand him the box. As I turn, the guy goes, "Have a good one." I looked back at him. I said, "I did. I just did. It's still warm." So it's things like that. It could have been, hey, Dan dropped off his color guard box at the UPS store, but that guy, when he said, "Have a good one," it just, oh, wow, okay. Luckily, I had some improv training that I remember I said back to him. Anyway,
I love that. That's so fun. Earlier you said arc though, and I wanted to dig on that too, because you just told a really humorous story with an arc, and I want you to break down what an arc is and how we can use it in storytelling.
So, first off is, at the beginning, you wanna make sure everybody knows where you are, who you are, and why you are. You know, with the Dallas Comedy Club, we, tell true personal stories. So, part of that is, I was in high school, I was in college. There are other storytellers that tell stories, whether it was, 1800s or fantasy and things like that. So, getting somebody to know where you are, when you are, why you are, and that kinda thing is that, but something has to happen to make it a story, something unexpected or even expected, but there's something that changes something. And so that begins that arc. And then as you're going up that arc, other things happen. And it may be a short arc from an incident to the top really quick, or it could be stair step up. I get to that. And however that works. But what you're doing is then there has to be a resolution after that. You don't want to leave people hanging. You want to have that flattened out at the end. And it could be, you started here and you ended up here, or you started here and you up down here, but there's a arc that comes around that gets you back from that A to B and start to finish.
I've noticed that a lot of clients and people that we coach mistake the arc for I have to do something specific. And they don't realize that they have freedom. Can you
Yes.
speak to the freedom that the storyteller has in accomplishing the arc or applying Freytag or applying these other methodologies of telling a great story?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing that, you want to tell a true story. Well, in our case, you tell a true story. Everything had to happen. The exact parts of it don't have to be pulled in, but they only if they lead to helping push the story down the road. You don't want, content or, talking about something that doesn't mean anything, doesn't have anything to do with the story. Because, like with Chekhov's gun, people have watched enough stories that they know, okay, there's something here in the background that I'm noticing, and something that's going to have to be used at one point. I'll refer back to Matthew Dix has a really good story about how he is traveling home and he's in his car. He gets a flat. He then gets money from a guy at a house. He kind of cons him out of some money, and then he comes home. You hear that story; it's very well crafted. He's an amazing storyteller. But in his book, he talks about the fact that there was somebody else in the car with him, but they had no impact on the story. They would have taken away from the story. And so you don't have to do that. You have agency in how you present that and how you are working through the, again, getting back to the documentary versus story. A documentary may include a lot of things that don't really help push the story forward. And so having that every step makes it work better. You're working toward a conclusion. You want to have that problem resolved, and you're going to talk about how you did it or why you did it or who did it to you.
I noticed that sometimes students or clients fail to set the scene. Can you talk about the importance of scene in storytelling?
Yeah, and so from a personal perspective, that helps put people in the place of, one, it gives you a way that you're starting. This is I know you said scene, and we're thinking about, okay, I'm in the city, I'm in the country, I'm underwater, I'm top of the water, whatever. But also talks about the atmosphere that you're in. Is this a happy, sad, that? And so the scene may be, and building it is really important that you have this where people can understand it. So I have a story, again, it's about my dad, where I go to lunch with him and I pull up into, you may know it being in San Antonio, a place called Chester's. And when this happened, it was in a house. It's moved since, but you parked in a grass parking lot with a tree, under a tree. As you step out of the car, you smell that hickory smoke and you know you're going to have a wonderful time or a wonderful meal. You walk up onto the porch, you hear the porch creak, and you open up the porch door, and you have that, all that is giving that atmosphere about where you are. And you want people to come with you. That's the other thing is you're wanting people to live this with you. You're taking them on an adventure. And with that adventure, you want them to understand that there's sights, smells, things that feel both outside and inside that you want them to understand, and you're taking them with you on this experience.
I love that description of the hickory. I could smell it into Chester's. And I was also thinking of the other legendary Texas barbecue. When you walk in, that smell hits you and you're all of a sudden transported to the pit and it all looks so good. So we talked about scene and we talked about agency. What about emotion? What about that emotional resonance? And how do our students and clients draw the line as to what's too much or what's enough when they're talking and embedding emotion into their stories?
Yeah, well, you hit that's the big thing. Part of what you're trying to do is you have the, let's call it, the mechanical things that we were talking about a minute ago, where there you want them to know when it is, where it is, how it is, and things like that. But it could be, I'll go back to the story that I'm referring to at Chester's. I was about to go have lunch with my dad. My dad and I had a distant relationship, and I never looked forward to having that time with him. And in that, prior in other parts of the story, I'm building up that relationship and how that I feel about that, and why going here is not the most fun thing I want to do. But that so getting that emotion out. Part of what you ask also is how much emotion and what do you reveal. If you're talking about something that happened to you that was very horrible, you can talk about that without, unless you want to, revealing what that is. And I've had students that have talked about some really, in class, what we do is we bring out everything about around the story, the good, bad, and the ugly. And there's some things that you want to not, you don't have to communicate verbatim what it was. You can put that across and it can be done. That's where storytelling becomes a little bit like poetry, and that you're using the right word at the right time for the right emotion. Exposing that emotion is very important because, as again, getting back to the arc, you're one person here or you're one thing here and then something different here. You have to be able to have that. Part of that is emotion. And you start out where you're, like on my story, I was apprehensive. At the end of the story, I was very happy. So that having that emotion is very critical. Now, from a business perspective, you have to understand that you are the hero to your client, and being able to help them under whatever they're buying, they need to have the emotional understanding that they made the right decision, and how you present that. And I'm thinking more of a B2B play than, maybe a consumer item or something like that, but that they have the confidence that they're buying the right thing to help them do the right job for their business. And part of that is getting an emotional part of it. It's maybe not as heavy as a personal story, but it still needs to be there because we buy from emotion. It doesn't matter what it is you're buying, you're going to do it for an emotional reason.
And we often use rationality to
Yeah,
justify the emotion that actually sparked the buying decision.
absolutely.
The customer journey, right? This is the customer journey. And I know that students who are interested in applying this to business probably have an understanding of their customer journey, but they could probably use some of those same frameworks. What frameworks do you find most useful for the customer journey in telling the story?
I'm going to go back to the and but therefore because it's as simple. If here's the other thing, depending on what the format is, we're talking about, a TikTok or LinkedIn or Facebook video or post or something like that. You're talking about in a very finite, small time. So having anything beyond that, unless part of what your goal, let me back up. Maybe your goal is to get them more involved for a longer story, for a more in-depth reason, maybe a sales call or come to an event or something like that where they get more of the experience. But for the most part, it's that initial trigger that you're trying to get somebody to take action on. And whether that is, like I said, pardon me, filling out a form, coming to an event, accepting a sales call, things like that, they all come into place. And but therefore helps them understand that, you business advertising to them, marketing to them, you understand that's where the and comes in. But you also know where they have issues, and then that's where you are the therefore that solves that problem.
Let's apply it since you and I both teach storytelling. Let's apply it to that business. How would we go about telling the story of the value of storytelling for that potential customer?
Well, you know, you could go from a couple of different perspectives. One, a lot of people are afraid to get up in front of an audience and say, I know that you're afraid to get in front of an audience. I know that you've had a bad experience, but these things can be handled, and therefore come to this and you'll do this. I'll give an example. I had a lady that actually started in my intro this time last year. And we go around the class, and she said, I've taken stand up and I've taken improv, and I've never made it to the showcase because I'm so scared. That was a challenge for me. I wanted to do so. What she did, she did the showcase, and then she took the same class again. Now she's performing in storytelling shows all the time, and it is just amazing. But the getting back to your question, how do you sell it? It's something that, storytelling now is so important, and that there's so many technical layers of things. There's so many other things that come into play. Whereas if you can cut through all that with a story that somebody's going to remember, you have to assume that people understand that if they're in a business situation, they're looking for a product to help them, that there's going to be a minimal way that that problem's going to be solved. And that could be, there could be regulations, there could be rules, there could be, if you're selling something that people consume, or they are, transportation or something like that. There's always going to be something that is at the minimum is going to get there. You don't have to go through all that unless you're selling a car like a Volvo, which is known for safety, and they built their brand on safety. Then that's what you can get into that. But the main thing is getting across what the simplest thing to understand about your product is, and why it will help that person do what they need to do.
So to put that in the and if but then, we have a ideal student, and you kind of did this earlier with the student who overcame their fear, right? You put that into that perspective. Can you give us another example since it's such a powerful framework?
For storytelling or for anything?
For selling storytelling specifically, the and if but therefore.
Yeah. Well, I had a real estate agent in my class that was selling to first time home buyers. Yeah, as you can, anybody's ever bought a home, there's multiple factors that go into what you did. And what he learned from that was he didn't have to sell all the different pieces parts. He just had to say, "Hey, I know you're a first time home buyer, and you're concerned about what the mechanics are for buying a home, as well as how much you can afford. But you don't have all the information. Therefore, I'm going to provide that for you. And with that, you'll be able to buy the home that is best for your family." And he's now using that in his business, and he's doing pretty well.
Perfect, and a perfect exploration of the usefulness of a simple storytelling framework to help to serve a client who he actually helped.
Right. Their customer journey was fulfilled by that, and all the emotions that come with that, and then somebody not being able to move forward. It was overcome through the story.
Excellent. This reminds me, I wanted to ask about purpose. We talked about seeing, we talked about agency. I really want to dive into purpose. How important is it to know the why and to be able to communicate the why directly to the audience?
Wow, yeah, that again, you're hitting good points. The why. So, from a personal perspective, it could be that you're wanting to share something that you want other people. Again, you're not selling, you're not preaching, you're not doing anything like that. But there needs to be a why in every story. Otherwise, people get confused. They don't know where it's going, and that type of thing. So the why has to be there to drive you through. Now, the why not be may not be revealed to the end because you're building up to that, but that's something that's always there. And that typically a story that doesn't have a why is a bad story. Now, from business, there's different factors that come into play because of your brand, the competition, the environment that you're selling in. All these come into play, and that why is something that you have to get down really tight, really look into, because there other brands may have similar whys. And Simon Sinek, I think, is the best, where he has the five. Is it the five whys? You get down to that single core, and that's where you stay. Just I think in his one of his examples, he used Dell versus Apple. Dell builds computers. Look how fast they are. Apple sells something that's going to make you a hero. Look how great you are. So it's those types of things.
I love that example that you used of the IBM or the computer versus the Mac computer, because obviously that is a part of our identity. How important is identity in storytelling? And I know this is connected nicely to the purpose because a lot of our students and clients come to us with a personal story that they want to tell, and that identity is embedded in their stories. So, can you lift the veil on identity for us?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways. One is I actually saw a showcase this weekend where a trans person who's autistic was wanting to talk about things. And from that, you were the why in the, but there was also the empathy that came across for what this person was going through and why they were going through that, and how if everyone heard that story, they might have a little bit more compassion about that type of that situation that they were in. The the other thing is just coming across, and I guess having authenticity is a big thing. Somebody once told me if I could fake authenticity, I'd be a hero. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. But at any rate, having that experience that you're talking about something that is in your heart, that is coming across, whether this is something you sell as a business or something you feel as a person, all comes into play.
And a lot of people struggle with that authenticity. What advice do you have for them? Because I know it can be intimidating to share parts of yourself with an audience. And a lot of us are very private people. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. We're all human. We all make mistakes. And people give a business example. I had a client that was a national client that they thought that their reviews on different websites always needed to be a 5 star, which is the highest. And what happens is when people see that, they don't believe that. There's no way, especially a company in this company, I won't reveal who it is, but we were hired basically to help with their reputation management. They had a horrible reputation. And so, you can't flood that with all of a sudden all these 4 or 5 star reviews. People see through that. So having that authenticity and knowing that, people like to know you started here and you climbed your way up. And doing that, you came across several obstacles that you overcame. And people want to learn from the stories that they hear. They want to hear, oh, okay, I don't do that, but I understand where they're coming from, and I can apply that to my life as well. So there's different ways that authenticity. Also, if you walk up there and you're just a robot, you're going to be doing all these things, or talking about whether it's a personal story or a business story. You don't come across as somebody that can be trusted. That trust gets, authenticity equals trust. You take that away, and there's no way that they're going to do, probably no way that they're going to do business with you.
That's so true. You also mentioned empathy. Can you touch on the importance of embedding empathy in stories and also empathy as an audience member trying to learn about someone else?
Well, so what you're doing is you're wanting to provide your identity of what you are, who you are, why you are, and from that, there's we're very humans are very dynamic. We have so many different things. Where we came from, how we were raised, what we're doing now, where we want to go, what our kids or why our partners, everything all along those and. Being able to establish that and make that it does get back empathy does get back to identity, and that you understand what it takes to do something and putting that across to other people so they can understand that. You want to provide that empathy that they can grab onto that and understand that. Empathy, authenticity, all kind of come into create that same ball of wonderful humanness.
Yeah. And that also, I think, bleeds beautifully into characterization and building believable characters in any story.
Well, with stand up, what you want to do is you want to create your persona, and your persona is your point of view on the world. My point of view is I am naive and gullible. I'm a lot like Ted Lasso. So when you have that characterization where you can understand, I am these things. 8 of them are good, 2 of them are could be better, but I'm gonna play off from that point of view, and that helps you understand where you can go and how you can that. Plus, having your point of view and being able to articulate that is very important. Once you have that established, that helps you, 1, write better stories. 2, it gives them authenticity. 3, it helps with the whole performance aspect of that story.
I know a lot of people really do struggle with point of view, so I'm glad that you brought that into the characterization discussion. They struggle with point of view because they're like, I don't know which one is appropriate. What do you mean I have to pick a point of view? I have this point of view, I have that point of view. How do you go about coaching people to pick the point of view that best suits them? Is it based more on the story or the storyteller?
So the storyteller, absolutely, because again, I'm coming from the personal storytelling aspect. You can't fake yourself, and what I mean by that is that when you get up on stage, you're up there all by yourself. There's nobody around you. It's dark. The lights are shining on you. The microphone is there for you. Everything is for you. You can't fake it. And so having that understanding about who you are and going through storytelling helps you define that. When you're doing a personal story, you're looking at yourself kind of from a secondary point of view, and you're looking back at yourself. And looking back at yourself, you may see things that you hadn't seen before, things that you like and things that you don't like, things that you may have. It's always funny. My ex-wife, when she met me, she thought I was a drug person. and I'm not. I mentioned earlier, I not have never done drugs. I don't drink. I don't do any of those things. What happens is you go, how did she see that in me? And so you have to look at where people are seeing you and have that objective way to take a look at that and pull that together. So understanding that, and then don't be so bullheaded that you're going forward, forward, forward without any looking back on things and saying, okay, why did I do that? Over a period of time, you make the same mistakes, whether they're small or big. There's little things that come along, and sure, you learn from those. But having understanding that people see you differently than you see yourself, but understanding how you can create that persona, how you have that self understanding, helps you then refine your story so that other people can hear it and understand it like you want them to, or what you are intending to do, I should say.
That's point of view. And point of view, there's so many different layers to that. How do you play with the layers of point of view in a story? You mentioned, for example, your spouse having a different point of view from yourself. Is that the end and be all? It's just two layers of point of view? I can only do two, or are there more?
I'm going to use the old it depends. Part of that is the story that you're telling. If you're talking about something where like that part I mentioned about my ex wife, or if there's something that maybe my kids see me as, some of that doesn't need to be pulled in. You're not trying to create a fake persona, but we hear people and we see people, we make judgments on them pretty quickly. And what you're wanting to do is eliminate the things that are wrong and emphasize the things that are right. And when I say that, not from a like a politician's point of view, where you're ex- uh, blowing that up so much that they only see that the whatever you're wanting to project. But what you want to do is understand that you're communicating something, and like you said, there's so many layers that we have that we don't have to drudge them all up again. That gets back also to the documentary, and playing off of that, you don't have to include that. You need to have the information that helps somebody understand your point of view and why you're doing it, and why did this, and we haven't talked about stakes. What is the stakes that come into play? And that helps pull in what you want to create from your point of view, what you want to have from what you how you handle something. Everybody handles situations in different ways. I live in Dallas, and we have tornado alerts a lot. And in my house, when the tornado alert goes off, my wife and daughter get the dogs and the cats and go down and hide in the closet. I go out and look at the sky and see, where's it coming from. It's just how you handle things are different, and having different perspectives. But this getting moving to stakes is one thing. You're telling a story that has something that happened, and that has some type of whether it's danger, opportunity, or something that's playing into that story that you want to be able to communicate that, and how that why that is important, and what happens if it does happen, what happens if it doesn't happen, and how you move from that, and how you solve that problem, and how you do that from a human perspective pulls back in the different layers of from your point of view, from your who you are and why you're doing what you're doing.
Stakes need to be discussed not just at the height of the climax and the conflict. Can you give us an example of where we need to be laying the stakes out for our audience from a business perspective and from a personal perspective, for a personal storytelling versus business storytelling?
So, in both cases, you have, I'm going to use Freytag's pyramid here. You have what's called exposition. And in that, you're talking about all the different things that are happening. And if you think about watching a movie always opens with exposition, and you're seeing, okay, all these things. And maybe you may have little things peppered in there that don't mean anything at that moment, but they're going to have something in later. So it could be that, somebody comes home from work, the kids are playing in the yard, they're playing with a ball, and the ball goes in the street, and the father gets the ball and gives it back to the kids. Okay, that's just showing a dad that cares, and the kids are having fun in the yard. Now you fast forward, and I'm making this is a fantasy type thing. Now you move forward, and the kids are playing out, but there's a monster coming down the street, and all of a sudden that stake is heightened. You know he's going to take care of them because he's already displayed that. So that's where you lay that foundation in the exposition. The stake also doesn't have to be in this what I just mentioned, where there's a monster coming down the street. It doesn't have to be something that grandiose. It could be something small that affects them, and whatever that is, you have to emphasize that while this is a, like a tire puncture, it's a small thing, it could cause a blowout later, or they have to fix this now to avert something bigger. So having that, how you're establishing the stakes and kind of give your foreboding things, your front loading things, and that then as the story goes, it could be that that stake gets increased and increased and increased, or it could be one big at the height. It doesn't have to be, all of a sudden that stake revealed itself at the climax of the story. It actually probably suffers if it does that. It needs to have that little pieces, gumdrops, or things along the way that people can pick up and understand. And that's one thing I love watching thrillers or mystery movies, in that you're seeing how the storyteller laid the groundwork for what's coming up later. There's a movie by M. Night Shyamalan. I can't think of the name of it, but it's about where these people live in the 1800s, but then you find out they're really in
The Village.
the village. Thank you. It drove me crazy that go back and watch it. The very first scene, and the camera is back here, and you see this person's clothing and the back of their head, and my wife goes, "That's a modern shirt." They try and make it look like it's 1800s, but that's modern clothing. That was made by a machine, and I'm like, wow. And then it turns out that yes, it was. But it's those little things that you look at that, what she did for fun was, she knew that that was her business, or her fun stuff. But that was something that comes into play. And then, those are little things too. When depending on the story, there's applications for the story. Are they introducing you to a new concept? Are they reinforcing a concept? Or are they trying to change your mind on something? Or, all those different things that come into play.
I love M. Night Shyamalan movies. I was thinking of The Lady in the Water and the structure of that. And it gets kind of meta in there, doesn't it? They're
Yeah.
commenting on
Yeah.
it. Have you had instances where you were coaching a client or a student to get meta in their storytelling, to comment on what's happening as the storyteller using that objective perspective you were speaking of earlier?
Not really. I think that, primarily what I'm with the Dallas Comedy Club is it's level one and then level two. That's a complicated structure. It has to be done right, otherwise people are going, "What's going on?" But to answer your question, no. But it is something that, having the underneath coming out to play, is it can be important.
You mentioned level one and level two. What's the difference?
A level one, you're understanding what the frameworks are. Like I said, we primarily teach, or we talk about two. Understanding that, crafting that. First, it's an 8-week class. 4 weeks are lecture, and then 4 weeks are workshop. So then level two, you're taking that, and whereas level one, you may tell a story that goes from when you're a kid, you're an adult. Level two is where you're getting down into this happened in one day, and with that, you still need to know what happened before that and what happened after that. It's my squeezing it down to a very short time period.
So the difference is the time squeeze.
The time squeeze as well, and then also the comedy comes into play more there. You're, uh, a lot of times a story can be funnier when it's shorter. Otherwise, people are, oh well, we're going on a trip. I don't want to do that. Having that short story that has humor in it, that you can heighten things pretty quickly, as well as you're not, with a short story over a short period of time, you're not having to give some of the details that you do when you have a longer story. Therefore, you have more time to add humor or ensure that there's humor within the story.
And earlier you talked about the power of timing and humor. What are the other dimensions of humor that you would look at in your level two course?
Well, one, that people understand, that it gets back to the point of view, they are in the persona, that you're coming at this from a perspective that they come along. So one thing, and I'm going to kind of answer the question sideways. What we talk about is a stand up generally creates the universe that they're in. You think like Taylor Tomlinson, she's amazing at that. And the way that she creates this universe, and everything in that universe that she created is true, and that's how she makes her humor. With storytelling, because we do true personal stories, you have to be talking about something that happened to you, and you're not creating the environment; you're revealing the environment. And when you reveal that, then there's opportunity for both people to you're they're coming along with you on your journey or your adventure. and two, that there's ways that then they can see things that they may not have seen otherwise because you're taking them down that path.
And you really have to hold their hand sometime, right? You have to say, wait, come with me on this journey. And there's a sense sometimes that the audience may not want to come with you and you have to work a little bit harder. Can you speak to the laborious process of trying to pull the audience along when maybe they don't want to come? In other words, more hostile audiences.
I'm going to argue there that's stand up crowd work. Um, and okay, here's one thing about difference between stand up and storytelling. In stand up, you, the audience member, you're challenging the comedian to make you laugh. In storytelling, you're here to hear what they have to say. You want to go along with them. There very rarely has there been any pushback because generally people, that's the other thing we were talking about. How do you define storytelling? How we define it is if you go to a rock concert, you know what you're going to see. If you're going to go to the symphony, you know what you're going to see. If you're going to go to uh, a cello, whatever, you know that. With storytelling, you don't always know that. So there is the problem that people may be expecting stand up and they're not going to get that. That it may be that, and that's where the audience may come in. And sometimes they may not want to hear what you're talking about. And then the cool thing about the way we do storytelling and the way I've seen others, like for instance, the Moth is, or the Tejas storytelling, is that there's multiple people telling stories within a show. There have been times where people have questioned. I'll be honest. I told a story a couple weeks ago on the what do you call it, Story Slam on Zoom. And they asked me if I was a liar. You know, there's a storytelling liar competition. And I said, no, that really happened to me. What I hope that everybody's had a life that they can tell stories about that people won't believe because that, you know, that sounds so outrageous. How could that have happened? But we all put ourselves in situations where all of a sudden, how did I get here? And then how do I get out? And that becomes a good story to tell at some other point.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the different story types and shapes of story from Kurt Vonnegut. And one of those was Person in Whole. How did he get out? And it reminded me of some of those other stories, shapes. Can you speak to some of the story shapes that you use when you're helping students?
Wow, you're now at a level 3 level. So typically, if the story has a conundrum, then and it again it's based on true personal stories. They got out of that some way. They're not creating a way to get out of that. Now, the perspective that they have of getting out of that may be different. The story that I mentioned a minute ago, how they asked me if I was a liar, I'll tell a very short piece of it. I mentioned I was on the swimming team and I had shaved my legs so that I could swim faster. My buddies and I got together. We played car chase. My car got stuck in the mud. A guy came out with a gun and shot at me and then forced me to take my clothes off. And so I'm standing there in his yard on a busy street in San Antonio with my shaved legs and everybody looking at me like, oh, that really happened. That, and how that all came about was interesting. You had to be in certain places and certain things happening for that to come about. But I'm sure that people have found themselves in situations that they walked into without realizing that there hopefully wasn't danger, but maybe if there was, they got out of it because they're telling the story now. Hope or they caused the rift in maybe a family situation, and they want to talk about how to get past that. There's uh, different ways to getting out of the hole. There's always going to be a way that that person has solved that problem in a personal story. Now, some of the resolution may not have been fully realized, and one cool thing I tell people that storytelling class is not a therapy, but going through and thinking, especially when we're workshopping and you have all these other people that have different points of view, they're hearing your story and how you lived through it. They may bring up something that you had not thought about. With that, then that story then again, it stays true, but that a different perspective added on top of that helps make it more solid, make it more possibly believable or more outlandish.
Yeah. Storytelling a lot like cooking, right? You got the layers, you got the ingredients, got to make sure that you have just the right thing for the audience's palate. I think it's an apt metaphor for sure.
Absolutely.
Other places that you have seen that you have learned from. I know you've learned from Tejas. I know you've learned from Moth. I know you've learned from Dallas Comedy Club. We heard you mention Storyworthy with Matthew Dix. What are some other sources of inspiration for learning about storytelling and places that you found bringing in wisdom to your own courses?
Well, I have three storyteller heroes. One is Matthew Dix, and I follow him. And I'm going to take a little left turn and come right back. Uh, he uh, uh, he's working with Google on what's called a portrait, and it's scary in that what this portrait is his thinking in a AI tool that you can talk to him with his voice and ask him questions about stories, and he will give you a Matthew Dix answer, which is, for me as an instructor, is kind of scary. Anyway, but Matthew Dix is one place. Hassan Minaj is one of my storyteller heroes, and then Mike Birbiglia. Those are the thing. Matt Hassan has a new, or maybe not that new, but podcast called Hassan Knows Nothing, or doesn't, whatever. I tell you, my IQ goes up 2 or 3 points every time I listen to that his show. But those are some places. Margot, long story short, is a really good book that and she comes with a lot of history on that. And it just, I guess having that storytelling lens where you are thinking, okay, this happened to me today. Is this story worthy in Matthew Dick's language, or is this something that I want to repeat? Or having that lens where you're looking for things that happen to you that then become a story. But getting back, the Margot, long story short, Hassan Minaj, Mike Birbiglia, Matthew Dix, almost anything on the Moth is a wonderful place to go. One thing I won't give away, the first class I give homework is they have to listen to this one Moth story about this guy that goes off to college and he dates somebody and then finds out later who that person was. I'm not going to reveal who that is, but I tell them you can't be driving your car while you're listening to this story because the turn that it takes is so outrageous, scary. But where I'm going with this is that you listening to other stories, whether it's any of the people I mentioned, anybody on the Moth, any place else, is always a good place to find help define what a story is and what story might mean for you or how you can relate to that.
If you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice to remember and to take home and to practice, what would it be?
Everyone lives a life that is worth a story. I don't want to use story worthy, but I'm going to say story worthy. Everyone lives a life that has meaning, has things that you know from your perspective that you can share with others, and you'll be surprised that there may be things that have happened to you that other people can benefit from. And you want to be able to share that. And storytelling is so fundamental about who we are. I think that everyone looking for keeping their eyes and ears open for things that have happened to them, things that they see, and then and processing those, and then someday maybe getting up on stage and telling a story.
Excellent. Dan, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. Where can people find you online? You have any social platforms?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm the Dan Sturdivant that lives in Dallas. Believe it or not, there's five of us, but actually there's one in San Antonio, but I'm the one that lives in Dallas. Yeah. So if you're in the Dallas area, and you first Sunday of the month, we have a free show on at 6 o'clock on down to Dallas Comedy Club, which is in Deep Ellum. I probably should be better at doing social media and have some place to say go there, but I don't.
Yeah.
But
Well, no, LinkedIn social media. That's
yeah,
where we're going
LinkedIn.
to find you. Well, thank you again, Dan. We appreciate your time and you sharing your wisdom.
Well, Ryan, this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.